focused must remain on lowering costs on family budgets. As you heard the work of MMB, they said to offset any new spending needs to be offset with spending or reductions, savings. That's what we need to do here. We know that structural imbalance is still an issue, as you saw in the out years. We still have a spending problem. We need to rein that in. Our work, as you heard, last year helped very much, but there's still much more to do. So we're seeing yet again that Minnesotans are overtaxed, with another forecast that's showing we do have a higher tax revenue than expected. We're also seeing that conformity to program integrity requirements set by the federal government is a necessary step to cut down on fraud and ensure that dollars are going to those that need it the most, as well as to ensure that we don't lose the federal dollars. We need to act. House Republicans stand ready in 3 ways: federal tax conformity. We're also looking to take the pressure off of family budgets, and we want to stop fraud. Those are top priorities for Minnesotans across the state, and we look forward to the work that will be done this legislative session, this shortened year. I'm going to turn it over to Leader Harry Niska.
Thank you, Speaker Demuth. My name is Harry Niska, the Republican floor leader in the Minnesota House. This forecast really demonstrates that pro-growth economic policies and economic growth are the real solution to both our economy and also the fiscal situation that Minnesota has. One of the major drivers in the improved economic outlook is the national economic rebound driven by federal policy from Washington, D.C., pushed by Republicans. That's the real solution to the fiscal disaster we've seen in Minnesota from Minnesota Democrats. We need to reverse the policies that are holding our state economy back so we can fully participate in that national economic rebound. We saw this from what the Minnesota Chamber recently released. They did economic benchmarks looking at where we are at compared to the other states in our country in economic growth. Minnesota is falling behind in economic growth compared to other states, falling back to 33rd in GDP growth, 39th in job growth, and 46th in growth in median household income. Even if Minnesota were to improve its economic policy to where we were in the middle of the pack, we would actually be in that much better of an economic situation. So Minnesota needs to dramatically reduce its, or dramatically improve its tax and regulatory environment, its economic competitiveness, so that we can keep up with the rest of the country. Unfortunately, Minnesota Democrats are too focused on fighting against the federal administration and fighting against those economic opportunities to allow us to fully participate in that economic rebound. The recent announcement from Senator Klobuchar that she's going to vote against new mining opportunities in northern Minnesota is a perfect illustration of the wrong direction that Minnesota Democrats are focused on. We should be trying to fully capture the economic rebound that's happening in the rest of the country here in Minnesota. This also demonstrates how we need to continue the fight on fraud. We saw today that health and human services costs started dropping as soon as the administration finally started checking for fraud in these programs. That's the bare minimum that the administration is doing right now. We have a robust plan we've been talking about for years and years and years, and we have the opportunity to cut down dramatically on the amount that the state pays out to fraudsters. It's good, I guess, that finally in the 8th year of this governor's administration, he's implemented some bare measures of fraud that have slowed down the avalanche of fraud that's been allowed under his administration. But imagine what we would have saved if he had taken Republicans seriously when he came into office instead of paying out billions of dollars to fraudsters over the years. Minnesota Republicans are going to continue to fight for program integrity, and considering the fact that, as the governor acknowledged, a big part of the Democrats' newly announced fraud plans are provisions that Republicans have been advocating for, fighting with Democrats for years and years. We expect that we're going to be able to make some really serious additional progress on stopping fraud, and that should improve our economic outlook going forward as well. So now I'll turn it over to Senate Leader Mark Johnson.
Well, good afternoon. And first of all, cheers to the national government right now and the policies that they're putting in place that are pro-business, making sure that our national government or our national economy is growing in a way that allows Minnesotans to reap the benefits from that. That's really what saved Minnesota's budget right now. Cheers to Minnesota Democrats that continue to focus on government needs. We got to make sure that we are focusing on the needs of Minnesotans for affordability. That means tax conformity. That means making sure that we're lowering things such as tab fees for vehicles. That means that we're focusing on things that affect things like property taxes. Look, we need to make sure that we're doing the things that focus on Minnesotans, putting them first throughout every policy that we do. And what we saw today was really a model of what Minnesotans should be focusing on, and that's how to grow this economy. We've got an opportunity here. We've got a lot of work in front of us. Democrats are still in a position right now where we're spending more than we're taking in. The only reason why we have money left on the bottom line is because our savings account still has money in it so we can write checks. That's going to run out soon. If we don't fix that, we're going to be in a heap of trouble. This session, we got to work together and making sure that we are focusing on Minnesotans and trimming down government spending in a way that helps out this state to make sure that it can grow and prosper in ways that we haven't seen for a long time. You saw the tone of the governor today really was a different tone that I haven't seen from him. I think trying to really cover up a lot of the work that we have in front of us, a lot of the wrong decisions that were made over the last two previous years under that trifecta. We have a lot of work in front of us, and we're going to be buckling down here now with the forecast out, that we're going to be doing that going forward and trying to figure out how to put Minnesotans first again, not state government. With that, I think most of the other points have been covered very well with House leadership. I think we're all open to take questions.
Yep, the question is on tax conformity, how it would hit the state budget. And I want to clarify, as we heard from MMB, they said to offset any new spending with savings or spending reductions is what we need to do. So when we're looking at that tax conformity, the whole idea would be to make things more affordable for Minnesotans. As we have seen our costs rise and other things that make it harder here in our state, as we're talking property taxes and some of the other things that Minnesota families are facing, higher tab fees and all of those things that make it more expensive. The idea, and as you heard from the state economist talking about that K-shaped economy, you know, we're looking at that middle class or a little bit lower than middle class of how things hit them. No tax on tips specifically in the first fiscal year would be $126 million. No tax on overtime would be $265 million. That is a hefty amount when we're looking at where the budget is, but I want to remind you of where we were in 23 and 24 with excess taxes, excess spending. We had the $18 billion surplus, and what we didn't do for Minnesota families then is we didn't give them relief, we taxed them more. It is catching up with us. Right now, our state looks okay with the deficit down the road. We have to be smart, but we also have to make sure that job creators and job providers can do what they need to in the state to grow our economy and then still make things affordable for Minnesotans. Thanks for the question. Yep, as you heard earlier too, that our state economist said slightly improved national economic outlook is what is driving higher revenue forecasts. So you heard that national things are positively affecting us. Right now, the changes at the federal government, we have to make sure that we are doing everything to comply with those, such as the backgrounds that they need, and we need to make sure that there is the ability, if people are on SNAP, if there's work requirements, there are things we can do here at a state level that will help us avoid any cuts. But when we're looking at fraud, and it has gone on for years under the current administration, there needs to be a level of responsibility that when it wasn't taken at a state level, the feds are going to help us make sure that there is not more fraud going on. So what we're gonna be looking at, and I'm not saying right now that we need to do full tax conformity, would I like to? Absolutely, I wanna make things more affordable for Minnesotans, but our Ways and Means chairs, our tax chairs, our caucuses are gonna be looking, and for every dollar that is either unspent or could come back, they're going to be doing that hard work together. We are still in a tie in the House, and as you heard the governor say, how well we worked together last year, we have that opportunity, both Democrats and Republicans in the House, and then along with our Senate colleagues, to do the good work for Minnesotans. Whatever dollars we can find for savings, we will absolutely do that. We know that we need to prevent fraud here in the state of Minnesota, and if it takes the feds putting on a little bit more pressure on Minnesota, I absolutely support preventing fraud here in the state so our tax dollars aren't stolen any longer. I think it makes sure that the people that are going to be receiving dollars actually are legitimate people that are needing those dollars. Right now, we know that this is what is proposed. There are things in the courts. There are things that we don't even have the full details of yet. We know that we are taking care of people in Minnesota as they need to be. We have to look back. As you heard just a couple of days ago, there's going to be a look back process. No problem.
The gun a little bit there.
What I know here in the state of Minnesota is we have record fraud. Whoever has committed that record fraud, it has gone unchecked for years here in the state. We need better accountability within our programs. Obviously, you heard earlier that Governor Walz said, you know, the programs, just cutting programs maybe isn't what we should do yet. Governor Walz is the one that cut the housing stabilization services because it was riddled with fraud. Minnesota has a fraud problem that needs to end, and that is the focus that we're working on.
Sure. So in the trifecta, Democrats dramatically reduced the energy that we can produce in the state of Minnesota. They created this unrealistic, no carbon-free by 2040 policy that bans most of the forms of energy that Minnesotans rely on. There were massive increases in regulatory mandates on businesses throughout our state. We're one of the highest tax states in the country. I think the Chamber benchmark report does a pretty good job of laying out all of the ways in which Minnesota is one of the most difficult states in the country to invest in, to create jobs in, to start a business in, to grow a business in. We heard just a mention earlier from the state economist that Minnesota just this last year was one of the first years we've been positive in net migration within the state. The reality is economically productive Minnesotans are leaving the state of Minnesota because of the negative the negative business climate in the state of Minnesota. It's very, very difficult for Minnesota to compete in our 50-state economy with the regulatory and tax environment that Democrats have imposed on the state. Right. So the reason we have a higher revenue number, the top line reason that that's being driven is because of overall economic growth of the entire United States economy. That's a result of overall the positive economic benefits of federal policy driven by Republicans in Washington, D.C. Minnesota. Our nation's economy is doing better now, and the outlook for it is better now than it was the last time the SPGMI did. And Minnesota is lagging behind the rest of the national economy. Read the Chamber of Commerce benchmark report, and it lays it out pretty well. we used to be sort of middle of the pack in terms of all kinds of economic growth metrics, and we're falling down into the 30s and 40s on all these economic growth metrics. And that should be pretty concerning, I think, to Minnesotans as we think about the importance of economic growth to our fiscal health going forward. And not only is that something that our caucus would support, it's something that our caucus had to fight with Democrats last year in order to get the governor gave the example of the SSIS funding. The state has sort of neglected investment in this in the basic infrastructure that we expect counties to use to implement a lot of these social safety programs that we expect counties to administer, and Republicans had to fight tooth and nail with Democrats to get funding for that last year. I'm glad to hear that now the governor is acknowledging that that was really important that we did last year, but it is, if we're going to put burdens on our counties, we have to give them the tools that they need in order to be able to administer those programs. Yeah, we're looking at everything on the table. Obviously, what we were just talking about was a big driver in the property taxes. This last year, the state put more and more burdens on counties, and that's a lot of the big drivers. We're going to look at every solution we can to figure out how we, number one, reduce the burdens on cities and counties, school districts, paid family medical leave, ESST, a lot of the labor mandates that were put on by Democrats are a big driver in that. But in terms of looking at potential ways to offer direct relief for property taxes. Yep, we're looking at all those solutions. Obviously, we have to work something out bipartisan fashion. Other than the specifics I just gave you, no. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Today's forecast has some good news for Minnesotans. Minnesotans, our workers and our businesses are growing a strong and stable economy. And effective budgeting by decision makers has saved $10 billion in the surplus in our reserve account. That is good news for Minnesota. Our stable economy and balanced budget are a reflection of Minnesotans' tradition of stewardship, good governance, and hard work. But what was a flashing light of caution is now a bright light with warning alarms signaling trouble coming from Republicans and Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Huge cuts to health care and food programs, and shifting costs down to state and local governments and household budgets. Minnesotans are paying more, they're getting less. The increase in revenue in this forecast comes from the wealthiest few who had a great year in the stock market and they cashed out their gains. Good. Meanwhile, a growing number of Minnesotans are behind on credit cards, car notes, and student loans, and the gap between the rich and the rest of us is growing. The Trump Republican budget gives the wealthy another very significant tax cut, and it's paid for by the rest of us. Donald Trump's government and his retribution campaign is harming Minnesotans. He has done these things. He did this. He literally sent masked police who violated civil and constitutional rights. They abducted Minnesotans, and they killed a couple of Minnesotans in our streets. Donald Trump's actions are currently shrinking our workforce, destroying small businesses, and crushing family budgets, the costs of which are not yet evident in the forecast or in people's lives. His agencies are waging financial retribution on Minnesotans, defunding childcare, food programs that keep millions of kids and seniors fed, and health care that keeps hospitals and clinics open and staffed. Minnesotans are paying more in federal taxes than we get back in federal support. It's been that way for a long time, and we don't complain about that in Minnesota. No one needs to give us a medal. We're not Kash Patel. We're not asking for thanks for what we contribute, but we are demanding fairness. The DFL majorities have done everything we can to cut costs for Minnesotans. Billions of dollars in tax cuts for seniors on Social Security and working families. $1 billion for local governments to keep property taxes down. Free school meals for parents and kids, tuition-free college for young people, paid time off for workers. Trump and the Republican Congress are systemically wiping all of that out. Tariffs cost each household $1,700 last year, and Trump seems determined to increase that number in 2026. Housing costs are up through tariffs and labor shortages. Energy costs are on the rise because Republicans canceled clean power projects. There are cuts to and caps on student loans that are pushing college out of reach. Health insurance costs have doubled and tripled because Republicans in Congress didn't extend a tax credit. And hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans will lose health care and food support because of H.R. 1. Property taxes are spiking as new federal mandates burden our counties and leave Minnesotans with fewer services. The Republican affordability plans are an insult to people. They advise taking out a 50-year mortgage to buy a house. They want you to buy health insurance with a $30,000 deductible, or suggest buying fewer dollars for Christmas, or if you're lucky, include the president's sons in your grift scheme so he pardons you. Minnesotans are facing hard decisions because their costs are rising, but their wages are flat. And state leaders are going to face hard decisions this year and into the future, and those will be made infinitely harder because of the chaos and uncertainty created by Donald Trump's vengeful government and his compliant Republican Congress. Last year, we made hard compromises to balance the budget. We did it together. Hard choices resulted in the forecast that we are experiencing today. And I really do hope that we find that spirit again to do the work that Minnesotans sent us here to do. But we face an uncertain future. Most Minnesotans are working very hard, but they're falling behind, and we can't fail them. That's the work of our future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is not a normal forecast day, in part because this forecast comes with the biggest asterisk ever. All of the improvement we saw in the forecast today, in fact, more than all of it, would be offset by just the cuts to Minnesota's Medicaid funding that were announced by the Trump administration earlier in the week if they persist throughout the biennium. And that's to say nothing of the other cuts that Trump has promised, and to say nothing of the impact of Operation Metro Surge, which wasn't felt in the forecast either. Unless Donald Trump's retaliatory campaign against Minnesota is stopped, these surpluses are actually deficits. The chaos and uncertainty Trump has caused will make it very challenging for legislators to make budget decisions going forward, and real Minnesotans will be worse off because of it. I was glad to see the improvement in the state's fiscal position, but it's important to note that that improvement is largely because the richest Minnesotans and the largest corporations are doing better. Regular Minnesotans are still feeling the pain. An ABC News poll that was released just this morning says that over half of Americans believe that health care, a new car, and a week-long vacation are unaffordable. The most striking slide that MMB presented today to me was the one that's showing the huge growth in what they called non-wage income. Non-wage income being a great euphemism for the type of income that rich people make. Capital gains, interest, dividends. You know who doesn't make a lot of non-wage income? Teachers, nurses, construction workers, regular people, not to mention people on Medicaid. All of the folks who are losing their health care because of Donald Trump, they don't make non-wage income. The House DFL will stand with those folks this session. In December, I stood here and talked about the consequences Minnesotans were seeing as a result of the Donald Trump presidency. Higher prices, higher health care costs, more and more giveaways going to billionaires and big corporations at the expense of the rest of us. Since then, Donald Trump has only accelerated his campaign of retribution, which is his word, not mine. against Minnesota. He sent thousands of federal agents here to terrorize our communities. His illegal and chaotic tariff policies continue to hurt families and small businesses, and he continues to be completely disconnected from the reality people are experiencing, as evidenced by the State of the Union earlier this week. And now the Trump administration is looking to cut $259 million per quarter, some $2 billion a biennium in Medicaid funding from Minnesota. They're not interested in solving the problems we're facing. They're only interested in retribution against a state that doesn't support Donald Trump. This is on top of the other funding threats that have come from the federal government. This retribution campaign is simply harming the most vulnerable Minnesotans. J.D. Vance's solution to the problems they're creating: irresponsibly drain our budget reserve and leave our state in worse fiscal shape for the future. But in ordinary and extraordinary ways, Minnesotans have continued to stand up for their neighbors and their communities over the last few months. As legislators, it should be our job to have their back, to respond to the unconstitutional actions of the federal government, to address the fraud targeting programs meant to help some of the most vulnerable Minnesotans, and to help Minnesotans afford their lives. Instead, our Republican colleagues refused to stand up to Trump. I heard the Speaker of the House say that she supported Donald Trump's Medicaid cuts just a moment ago. I thought that was an incredible moment, that she supported his Medicaid cuts. They cheer him on as he attacked our state, and they continue to defend a broken status quo and a rigged system designed to work only for the rich and the powerful. The people of Minnesota deserve better than that. DFOs will continue to stand up for Minnesotans and will continue to work to build a future where hard work is actually rewarded, families have a real chance to get ahead, and communities can thrive. We're happy to take your questions.
I think that we, we're in the middle of a budget, first and foremost. And at least as we are thinking about it, we're keeping an eye on the things that need to happen, the urgent things that need to happen. If we do a bonding bill, which we plan to do, we'll have to pay for the debt service. We should pay for the security measures that have been put in place in the capital and the personnel costs. So there are some things that we need to spend on. But our caucus is very, very committed to being frugal, if you will, prudent, as we must, so that we are in a strong position going forward, and perhaps we can weather whatever comes from the Trump administration. And you're right that we can't predict it. He is unpredictable, and it is uncertain, and there could be billions of dollars worth of cuts. And Mark Johnson said cheers to the federal government. I would say jeers to that behavior of holding those things over the state's head and putting vulnerable Minnesotans at risk. So as we balance this budget, we're going to have to think about what kind of flexibility is going to be necessary for the administration if those cuts come in the summer, so we don't get called back in. But hopefully, the Republican members of the Congress that serve and represent the people of Minnesota will talk some sense into Donald Trump and make sure that the taxes that we pay into the federal government come back for us to be able to use for the people of Minnesota.
Yeah, so the bill that passed the federal government this summer is massive, and it has huge impacts on all sectors of the economy and all sorts of people. And as we look at tax conformity, and we will take a very strong look at it, we're going to be assessing who are the winners and the losers in that federal bill. And then we're going to think about what should we do with our limited resources. Should we make those winners even better off, or should we help the losers in that bill? Because we do have limited resources, made even more limited by the actions of the federal government. So at some point, I think that we do need to have a really serious conversation about conformity, but we can't just cheer on the federal government. We have to be really thoughtful about how we approach conformity.
Quick follow-up to that, no tax on overtime and tips that was mentioned, those generally would help more working class voters, and you were saying that that's who you want to support here, so is that something you're open to? Is there a way that you can do it partially if it's too costly to the state's budget?
Well, I think it very much depends on how it's paid for. I mean, we do want to help the people who are struggling with affordability in Minnesota. You heard the numbers that the speaker articulated. I didn't really hear a thought about how that would be paid for, I'd like to know more about how we pay for it. We certainly, the DFL could come up with a plan to pay for that, and we'd be happy to do that. Like I said, the wealthiest people and the richest corporations did very well in that federal tax bill. They did very well. And I don't think that they need to continue doing very well by the decisions we make in Minnesota's government.
With regard to the budget and taxes and tax conformity, I spent a lot of time this week with my colleague Senator Rust and her very sharp pencils and her very sharp mind. And she does have some things that she is considering. The Senate DFL did introduce last year a social media tax, which is a tax on data for those who are making a lot of money in the marketplace. So we'll see what she comes up with. But to the earlier question about conformity, I think just conforming with the federal government would be about $1 billion cost to the state's budget. And we have to think about what we're doing to propel Minnesotans forward.
Any other ballpark? I know North Star Policy Actions had 100 million lost wages due to Metro surge. Any other ballpark sense of just the last 2 months, workers staying home, businesses temporarily or permanently closing? Any sense of what the impact might be?
I don't know. I don't have a big dollar amount to share with you, and I don't know if Leader Murphy does. But I was just going to mention the city of Minneapolis came and visited with us yesterday and talked about the increased costs that they are bearing, which I think was it 80. Yeah.
So the only estimate that has been provided to me, at least, is the estimate from the city of Minneapolis on the impact and their economics in the city, and it's over $200 million. And that's just one city. So certainly the economic impact for the state is going to be tremendous, and as was mentioned, that isn't in the forecast right now.
Again, I think that we have to look at the urgent things we can do for the people of Minnesota while keeping our eye on the budgetary balance going forward. And I think most of us are thinking about either spending and reductions to balance out together because we want to make sure the future budget and that bottom line stays intact. For instance, Senator Port has been working over the course of the last couple of weeks on some assistance for people who have not been able to pay their rent, a very short-term, very targeted effort. That bill will be heard, I believe, next week in taxes. It's already been heard in the Minnesota House. That's a really good example. Senator Champion also working on a small business-oriented package. And when I was in Wilmer, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, I was reminded by small business owners there that their businesses have struggled just like the ones in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the surrounding suburbs because of ICE and detentions and people not coming to work because they're fearful. This is a statewide issue, even though some of my colleagues don't recognize it. And when we have had statewide crises in the past, we've come together to solve them for the people that have been impacted. And I think we need to take care of people in that same form this year.
You know, House Democrats want as big of a bonding bill as we can get. There are tremendous infrastructure needs across the state of Minnesota. And when we talk about property taxes, this is one way that we can render assistance by helping cities and counties with infrastructure costs that they would otherwise bear themselves. It also creates jobs for working Minnesotans. So we are absolutely all in for a large bonding bill. And as you know, Senator Murphy said, you know, we are committed to paying for it and finding commensurate reductions or revenue sources that will pay for it. We're going to have, you know, a long discussion about the budget, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but we want that. What we don't want is to be held hostage on the bonding bill, and we won't. If there's a price tag that isn't measured in dollars but in unrelated policy changes, we won't pay it. Yeah, I'm more than on board. And I was frankly pretty offended by the idea that they had to fight tooth and nail. It's ridiculous. Representative Jess Hansen led on trying to fund SSIS for years. And, you know, Chair Torkelson deserves great credit for the work he did last year on it. It was, as the governor said, a bipartisan effort, and it was just a complete distortion of the truth to say that they had to fight for it. You know, we rolled out an anti-fraud package last week, or earlier this week, excuse me, it feels like last week. And it included making investments in IT, because we do think that that's an important way that we can prevent fraud before it actually occurs, which should be the goal. You know, it's great to have accountability, and we need accountability. The people who are responsible and the businesses that are responsible need to be held accountable for that fraud. But the goal should be to prevent fraud before it happens. And getting these systems into this century, getting them out of the Oregon Trail era and into the modern day is a great way to do that.
Do you think that, as you mentioned this week too, that the cost associated with the upgrades will be expensive, but an investment worth making? Do you think that the numbers you see today allow for such an investment that could be hundreds of millions of dollars potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially. I think that, again, as I agree with what Senator Murphy said, that as we're making spending decisions, we have to be looking at the long term and thinking about how we pay for things very carefully. And so we're going to have to find a way to pay for that. That's not just taking money off the bottom line. Do I think there's a way to do that? I do.
Thank you.